Legally, I now have to tell you that we're recording the Skype. I love that it tells you that, just in case you hit it by accident and nobody knows what's happening.
Right.
All right. And what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It, your weekly movie podcast for reboots, remakes, sequels, adaptations, and as long as we're all self-isolating, whatever we want to do that week, because now the movie industry's release schedule is a riddle that no one can solve.
Yeah, that release schedule. Whew.
It's going to be, well, I think we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the show, because I do kind of want to get everyone's thoughts as it goes. As always, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me is my co-host, Terrence Tatum.
Hello, everyone.
And our special guest, who's also joining us through social isolation means, Adam Hlavac from Hyper RPG. Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me. It's good to be back. You guys are actually the first podcast that I've done remotely like this, so this is fun.
Oh, great.
Oh, nice.
I'll tell you, when this is over, we're going to be pros at it.
Oh, I know. There will be no technical glitches by the end of all this.
I know. Every time I'm like, oh, forgive our audio quality. And soon I'll be like, no, it's the same as if we were here. Maybe better. It won't
That's right.
be better.
We've mastered it all.
This crazy puzzle that for so long we were trying to figure out. And then one day it was like, did you know Skype just records conversations and gives you an audio file? And I
was like, wait, what?
And here I thought it was Doctor Strange magic tricks, but that's neither here nor there. Today we are talking about the movie Bloodshot, which came out March 13th, 2020 originally, the same day that LA started its social distancing efforts. And
poor timing.
I mean, well, nobody saw it coming, right?
No.
It's not Bloodshot's fault,
No.
but there's quite a lot to talk about. I think we'll start off a little bit with some small history of the character and the movie itself. It was the Valiant comic created by Kevin Van Hook, Don Perlin, Bob Layden in 1992. First appearing in Eternal Warrior number 4 and Ra number 0, which I'm going to pronounce wrong and not know, but that's fine. It has gone on to sell over 7 million comics worldwide and is on currently its 7th volume. The movie was originally announced in March 2015 after Valiant Entertainment made a 9-figure investment from DMG Productions to kick off a Valiant shared universe akin to Marvel and DC's efforts. And then in April it was announced that Bloodshot would be the first one, shortly before Paramount acquired Harbinger and a couple other properties, seemingly derailing this entire endeavor. So it's almost similar to The Hunt, which we talked about a few weeks ago, of just these poor little engines that can keep having these hiccups that are affecting them, and then right at the finish line having this awful pandemic happen that has annihilated the box office and closed theaters and changed the whole game in ways that I don't think we can predict or have even seen yet fully, because we don't even know what it will look like when
coming out of this
4 tent poles drop on a week.
Yeah.
Well, guys, what did you think of the story overall? Adam, would you like to go first as our guest?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting talking about this movie now because when it was first announced, I didn't really know anything about the Valiant Comics universe. But here at Hyper RPG, we actually hosted a tabletop version of the Valiant universe. And Zach, who is the CCO and co-owner of the company, he actually is friends with the producer Dinesh Shamdasani, good friends with him, and he's one of the producers on Bloodshot. So it's been very, very interesting over the years to, and I have to say I'm not the most well versed in the Valiant universe. I've dabbled in it a little bit, but I've actually haven't had a chance yet to sit down and read the history on all these characters. But it's a universe I'm definitely interested by and intrigued by, and it's been interesting to see the evolution of this movie and seeing how it kind of went from being announced to then, seeing things from behind the scenes and hearing a lot of notes about the movie and how the process of making it was. And we actually had Dinesh as a guest on our podcast last Tuesday, I think. And he gave us some insights and some tidbits about the movie that I thought were really, really fun. In terms of the movie though itself, look, I thought it was a entertaining movie. I think the movie suffers from a lot of the stuff we've previously seen. I made the joke before I watched the movie that it already, just from the cover, feels like it's just going to be another Triple X movie. And to some regard, it kind of is. But I still feel like they did the best they could, having with Sony losing the rights to Harbinger and the other greater Valiant universe, of kind of building something that can stand on its own, even though it can't interconnect into anything else. And you know, I like Vin Diesel. I think he's the most fitting when it comes to Fast and the Furious movies. He's not necessarily the most convincing hero, or he's not the most compelling or sympathetic or empathetic. Doesn't play the most empathetic characters, but I did have fun. And to be completely honest with you, right now, in sort of the time that we're living in, and because of everything that's happening, that's kind of all I'm asking for right now. I obviously appreciate stories with great depth and amazing character development and great spectacle. And even though I don't think this movie was bad in any regard, to be completely honest, I thought it was very middle of the road and very passable.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
kind of nailed it, because I felt the same way. Like I enjoy Vin Diesel when it's a big action romp, your Fast and the Furious, your first Triple X movie, and not
Yeah.
really the third one as much.
There was a
I
third one?
did.
Yes.
No, State of the Union was second, and it was Triple X. Was it just called Triple X 3? That can't be right.
There are 3, but the second one had Ice Cube.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
I don't even remember the third one was called anymore, but I kept waiting for the joke that he was going to reveal that he was Vin Diesel undercover as Triple X, and these movies would cross over.
I mean, he basically wears the same costume in every franchise that he's in.
Well, that was like one of the jokes our roommates made, because we obviously just bought the VOD to watch.
Right.
So now this is a movie I own.
It's okay. We own cats over here, so don't feel bad.
There you go. These are strange times.
These are some weird times. Yeah.
But where in his contract does it say that he needs to keep taking off his costume to reveal a wife beater under it? Because in the opening scene, he gets off of his mission and immediately rips off his camo fatigues to just be in his muscle shirt.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to me. Every time I'm like, man, where's the Corona hat? Where's the line about family? It's all in there.
I thought for a moment, I was like, did I start the wrong movie? Am I watching Triple X by accident?
But I did think that he had some scenes where he was like really acting in a way I hadn't before. When he's first confronting the spoilers of the inciting incident, the death of his wife or girlfriend, the love interest, and he's really yelling at that guy and getting emphatic. And a part of me felt like I had never seen Vin Diesel do this, and I was kind of impressed. Yeah. But everything else, it does kind of rest on the laurels of familiarity. It's very easy to just go, this is a Wolverine meets Captain America clone. He's the super soldier who doesn't have his memory, and he can heal, and nothing really hurts him. So there's immediately, when you go into it, kind of a been there, done that vibe. But I felt that they did enough visually with his nanobites that there were at least things I hadn't seen in superhero movies, of it either coming together or forming, or just even that fight scene with the flower in the tunnel, of just everything kind of being white and it feeling like snow. And that to me was very different. And those are the things that held me in and kept me engaged. And I think kind of elevated what could have been a pretty whatever movie into something that I almost did feel more like was a pilot and would see more of, depending on kind of the direction they take the characters. But it is overall like a fun experience. And Adam, you're right. That's exactly what we need right now. If I can just kind of load up on watchable entertainment, then I will. But
yeah, no, I agree. And like, the big thing, like you were saying, the action was actually like pretty well done for the most part. I really enjoyed that tunnel sequence where everything just goes red and he's just walking through and he's just getting blown apart and then coming back together. I thought that was very strong and very entertaining. I do think that the one scene he has with Guy Pearce on the pier where they're having their back and forth, Dinesh told us that was actually Guy Pearce's first day shooting, and they were battling some really, really bad weather conditions, and they only had a 90-minute window to film all of that. So it was pretty intense, he said. But that scene I did really enjoy as well. I actually also really liked Isa Gonzalez in this movie. I thought she was great. She was great in Baby Driver. She had a pretty small role in Alita Battle Angel last year, but the more I see her, the more I'm like, okay, this is a really great actress who's, may not be in some great. Not every movie she's in is great, but she's doing her best with what she's got. And again, the action is always what keeps me really engaged in a Vin Diesel movie. So I feel like they for the most part did incredibly well, and especially considering their budget was only, I think, $66 million or so. I thought the visual effects were pretty damn good for that amount of money.
Yeah. For me, I'm kind of with you guys. This is very middle of the road. I didn't hate it. I watched Triple X. I watched most of Vin Diesel's movies, and outside of the Fast and the Furious and probably the Pitch Perfects. I mean, not the Pitch Perfects, the Pitch Blacks.
Vin Diesel and Pitch Perfect, my
that would be amazing.
favorite film.
Outside of the Pitch Blacks, I don't really enjoy most things that he does, but Blake brought up a good point. The scene when he was in the chairs being tortured, I thought was some of the most emotional stuff that I've seen from him in a while.
Yeah.
This movie, for me, I love the visual effects, but I think sometimes the action sequences were a little cut too quickly for me, that I couldn't quite get in as I do for some things that sort of give me a little bit more, pull the camera back a little bit and I can see a little bit of everything. It was a lot of quick cuts, especially that final sequence. I was like, I don't know what this now has turned into a video game, and I'm not quite sure. This doesn't fit with the rest of the action sequences that have occurred before this.
Yeah, it's like Taken 3, 14 cuts.
Yeah, it was
right.
It was really weird.
It's very weird, like mid-thousands way of editing, where they just never let actors stay in a frame. Foreign movies did that too, where suddenly it was just like, and here, and we're here, and we're here, and we're here, and we're here. Don't worry about it.
That's what this whole film felt like, was the mid-2000s film. That's not a bad thing. It's just because, like you said, at this time, I'm just consuming whatever. And I'm like, cool, this got me not having to watch CNN for 2 hours. I'm down. But I don't know if this was available in the way that we normally watch films. I don't know if I would be as okay with watching this as me just popping it on at home in my pajamas.
My for me, because I'm somebody who has a list, I will literally watch anything. And for me it's easy to say like, oh, I'll watch it, but I totally understand how, maybe an average moviegoer would be like, do I want to invest my, $15-20 into watching this movie? There's a couple other movies that were out at the time that I think probably would have been a more worthy expense.
Yeah, this was the second weekend of Onward, which took the box office, and The Hunt was also out, and it was a fairly competitive weekend had it been, I think, a normalized time, but it did come in second, which we'll talk more about when we get over there, which is pretty good for, I think, when you consider all the other variables. But kind of the other thing I want to touch on with the movie itself, I think thematically, I wish it had gone a little bit deeper in sort of what it was trying to say and convey. I know the comic books have a real like modern day Frankenstein approach to it, that this character was sort of cobbled together from himself and other people and places and memories, and this kind of stew, or like a Powerpuff Girls recipe that then just spills in nanobites at the end and makes this superhero. And kind of the ramifications of that, once it really gets away from this first almost Groundhog's Day type story of waking up with new memories with a new target, which I also think is awesome. That's what kind of sold me on the movie and the trailer. And I was very impressed that we didn't make half the movie different targets. We really only got rid of one or two of them and broke that loop and went on with the story. It would have been really, really easy to bog this movie down with person after person after person after person. And I was glad.
Something I do like is, it's a pretty tight hour 45 too. And I think to your point, if it would have been a 2-hour movie, I think we would have got a lot of that repetition of going from victim to victim to victim to victim to victim. And I think after a while, you would have just been tired of it. I mean, I think, and obviously the trailers gave so much of this movie away, which, I hadn't realized at the time, but man, oh man, you basically like, they tell you everything short of Guy Pearce being the bad guy, which obviously from the minute you see him, you're like, oh, this is Aldrich Killian 2.0. I understand exactly what's happening in this movie. But yeah, so I don't know. It's tough, but I am glad that they broke that cycle. I actually really enjoyed Toby Kebbell in that opening scene, and it kind of like sets a fun tone for the movie, and it really helps you to kind of understand what's going on in this greater world, and then how they're playing with the memories. And I agree, though. I think that's a really cool concept, and I'm wondering, because Harbinger and the rest of the Valiant universe switched hands to Paramount, just how much of the movie had to be, the storyline and what they originally wanted to do to help set up the greater universe had to be sacrificed in order for, in order to not cross any sort of like contractual obligation or barrier.
Yeah, it's such I would love now to just see a documentary of how all of this really happened, because it's so weird to invest that much money into a potential universe and make what essentially is their Iron Man and then break up the pieces. It's almost the reverse of what happened to Marvel, where they sold off these characters to the highest bidder and then had this weird problem of, well, we have to go buy an entire studio to get the X-Men back and work out these deals with Sony, and we've got kind of Netflix borrowing some people on the side, and getting everybody under one house has been the challenge of this entire kind of endeavor. And it's one of the advantages that I always thought DC had that they never capitalized on. And now to see Valiant kind of start that and then create that problem for themselves, which I'm a big fan of not putting, the cart before the horse. Like, let's not assume that this movie is going to be a box office smash and get all the people excited about a Valiant cinematic universe. Let's make a good self-contained Bloodshot movie and move forward before we make any assumptions. I'm just very impressed that this movie didn't have what I feel like is now a very typical Hollywood ending of your movie stops and then there's like a 5-minute long fourth act that's setting up a sequel that and I loved the Alita Battle Angel movie, but it was a little frustrating that we stunt casted Ed Norton as the main villain and then ended with her like pointing skyward as if we just know that another one is coming.
Right.
Or even Happy Death Day to You did the same thing, where we set up this cool sci-fi franchise that we may never see. So it was kind of refreshing to not see them make that assumption. But I would love to know all the nuts and bolts that made Valiant cash a check from Paramount, I guess.
Well, it's a lot of moving parts, and a big part of it is Valiant itself changed ownership.
That's right.
So a lot of the people who were there, including Dinesh, they were there to really like kick off this new era of the Valiant universe. And then when it changed ownership, all of that stuff kind of went away. He was telling us when we interviewed him that Bloodshot is kind of like the movie itself is kind of the last thing that he will probably ever touch that's from Valiant. So it was kind of like a one and done. And now everything is at a new studio. So that's I think primarily the reason why a character like Bloodshot will have to exist in his own universe, and why they never bothered to set anything else up. The one thing that he actually did tell us was that originally the ending of the movie was going to tie into Harbinger, because those two things kind of go hand in hand. And Toyo Harada, who's one of the main characters, or is the main character, they had Ken Watanabe cast to play it.
Oh wow!
But when everything changed hands, basically all of that went away.
That's a bummer. I would have really liked to have seen that, but because that was the next setup. I believe they did Bloodshot, Harbinger, and then Harbinger War with Shadowrunner and Faith also announced, but now who knows what'll happen. And I completely get it from Paramount side, because I feel like they are right now one of the few studios that doesn't have big giant tentpole characters that they can kind of feed off every summer. It feels like their box office is kind of dictated by what Tom Cruise wants to learn how to do. If it's fly planes or do big stunts. And
yeah, they're really capitalizing on nostalgia.
Oh yeah, and they've got small wins. Is Quiet Places Paramount?
That's Paramount.
So they're getting.
We'll see when that comes out.
Oh, I know.
I feel like it's Paramount and Sony currently who are the two studios that are I don't want to say struggling. Struggling is not the right word, but they're having a harder time finding these franchises that really keep them going. I mean, Sony has Spider-Man, but Marvel Studios is heavily responsible for the success of that franchise. And they
Yeah,
had and they have Jumanji, and the last
Jumanji,
Jumanji
yeah,
did really, really well. But
right.
I don't know if people were as enthusiastic about Jumanji: The Next Level as they were the last one. And then Paramount, they've had movies like Gemini Man and all this stuff, and they've kind of done all right. But whenever they put out a Mission Impossible movie, those things pop real well.
They do.
Yeah, that's usually there. Like Maverick will make a money. A Quiet Place 2 one day will come out.
Yeah.
And then now they're shooting these two Mission Impossibles back to back. But you're right. Like when you look at, I mean, even Warner Brothers kind of lives in this weird world now where they release like a Joker and make $1 billion. And then in a year where they don't have that, they end up putting out a ton of small horror movies that quietly make all their money. It's the same thing that, Universal has Blumhouse that kind of quietly bring in all of this cash to let them work. And I mean, outside of A Quiet Place, I don't even think Paramount really has like a big horror franchise they can rest their laurels on. I know they acquired, in air quotes, the Friday the 13th rights. I think they were the last studio that had it before that went up in mystery, but
Yeah, I think it's reverted back to Warner Brothers now.
oh, well, then they are going to clean up.
Yeah, I
But
mean, and they have Star Trek, but they're not actively doing anything with it, or they keep saying that they're going to do something with it. But the last time I heard anything about Star Trek was JJ was going to do one with Chris Hemsworth and Chris Pine, and then Quentin was going to do a Star Trek movie,
Yeah.
and now it seems like neither of those things are happening.
yeah, and I think now the reality is everyone's going to sit back for a minute and then whatever was in development will change. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't even be surprised if you get a big Marvel Phase 4 shakeup in 6 months when everything hopefully relaxes or chills out. But back to Bloodshot for a while. I guess then kind of as an adaptation, it's interesting how the first 2 volumes of this comic are the exact story we saw, and they kind of did it twice and are constantly rebooting and redoing the characters. So I think from kind of a story and character piece, it is working out really well. Like they kind of nailed all the parts they needed to nail. So I think really the challenge is, this is Valiant's most one of their most successful characters, I should say. I don't know if it's their most successful, but it's certainly up there. What do you guys think this really had to do to stand out? In this now very cluttered superhero world, we talked a bit about it falling on the laurels of Superman, Captain America meets Wolverine, or all of these familiar ideas. Is there anything that popped, or you think they needed to make pop more after seeing the movie and the marketing to really show that it wasn't just familiar water?
That's a really good question. I mean, it is getting harder and harder nowadays because at a certain point, a lot of these superhero movies start to look and feel the same, depending on who's making them, what studio it is, what director, like combination of talent behind the camera. I feel like Marvel has obviously done the best job in terms of marketing these movies and making it feel like every time you see one of their films, it's a unique experience. Warner Brothers makes very good trailers, but a lot of the times their movies don't necessarily live up to what the trailers do. And I think for a movie like Bloodshot, that's the tricky balance, is how do we make a trailer, how do we market our movie to make it look really fun? Because it's a PG-13 movie, and I honestly, up until I saw it, I thought it was rated R. So, it's like how do you drive that sort of appeal, that it's, I don't want to say all audiences because it is pretty violent, but for majority of audiences, how do you drive that appeal? But also, how do you tonally convey that, hey, this isn't Thor Ragnarok, but this also isn't The Dark Knight. It lives somewhere in this like you guys were saying, this X-Man-y, Iron Man-y world, but conveying that and making people feel like this isn't just like a ripoff of a Marvel superhero is tough. And I think also because Valiant is known, but it's not a Marvel or a DC. That's another uphill battle, is the movie also has to kind of do the legwork of hopefully enticing people to go buy a comic book. And if they're interested enough and they want to know more about the character, whereas Marvel and DC, they don't have that struggle. Everybody knows who these characters are. So yeah, I think there's a lot of components. But I think what I think they could have done, I feel like a lot of movies that or studios that make these movies off of superhero characters, if they're not as well known, I think maybe, and I have nothing to prove this, but I think it would maybe be beneficial for the studio to focus on some of the comic book elements in the marketing process. Maybe making these little vignettes that talk about, the backstory of all these characters, like really help educate the audience. And I know that's kind of more for us people who live on the internet. For mainstream audiences, I think you just have to make a really good, solid trailer. And if you're going to put Vin Diesel in it, you really got to convince a lot of people that it's not just going to be Triple X or Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because I agree with Adam on that. I think this is a character that is, if you're a Valiant fan, he's a well-known character, but there's a huge part of the population that has no idea what the hell this is. So if you're going to put this out there and it is a comic book property, and you're resting your laurels in that, oh, we got a Vin Diesel comic book property, you need to let the audiences know that this is a comic book. Like I don't think they did a good enough job outside of us knowing that Valiant exists and Bloodshot is a character that exists. I don't think they did a good enough job to tell the general audience that, oh, this is a new comic book property that you guys should be paying attention to, and putting that comic in front of more people. I don't know what you do to do it, but he's right. At the end of the day, this just looks like a generic Vin Diesel property if you have no idea that this is attached to a comic book property.
Really quick, did they do any sort of Comic-Con coverage for Bloodshot, like leading up to the release, like last year? I don't remember.
Not that I remember seeing. If they did, it was very small because it was not really prevalent anywhere. I feel like this movie didn't really get a big push until really at the top of this year. I can't think of any big Comic-Con coverage. I feel like there wasn't a lot of press. It feels like the kind of thing where they probably spend a lot of their, I think, Adam, you said 66 million. The number I saw was 45 for their budget. So somewhere in between there, they probably spent so much of it on making this movie look good. And it does look good, that they didn't spend a lot on the marketing and advertising and press, or maybe they just thought they had not necessarily a dud, but an okay movie and kind of lean back on that. I think you can kind of notice every now and then if a movie doesn't have a big marketing push that they might know what they have and they're trying to save money where they can. But
some of this also probably has to do with Vin Diesel probably believing that he is a bigger star outside of Fast and the Furious than he actually is.
Yeah.
Well, I think Sony is still a very traditional studio when they market and advertise, in that they do lean very heavily on their stars. Most of Jumanji's marketing was at first, come see The Rock and Kevin Hart, like look at how cool they are. And
right.
Even Venom's big marketing push leaned away from kind of the comic bookiness and really, really put Tom Hardy front and center. They tend to do that a lot with their big franchises. Men in Black International was the same thing. It was a Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson vehicle, which I think the problem with doing that now is that it is a saturated market. And, I guess we'll see one day, right? One day there will be a Robert Downey Jr. tentpole and a new recast Iron Man movie. And we'll know if it was Iron Man that sells the movie or Robert Downey Jr. that sells the movie. And it's the combination of good casting and marketability that makes CU happen. But I think there is a reality to, do people follow IPs or movie stars now? And I think when you're trying to differentiate your movie, you probably need a really innovative take. And Adam, you brought up an interesting point that this is a PG-13 superhero movie. I think Venom was also PG-13, but I might be incorrect. But in either case, this and Morbius all are a little bit more mature in tone, but not quite a Deadpool or Birds of Prey or Joker, and not quite the fun, family-friendly, for everybody Marvel movie. And I think that tone is really, really hard to hit because you do this movie doesn't feel like a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, but it feels like a Sony superhero movie. It feels like it is produced the same way that Venom was produced.
Yeah.
And it looks the same way Morbius does, where they want these despondent characters that you feel bad for, but they're anti-heroes, and they're not really here to have fun, but they will be kind of plucky, and it makes kind of them dilute their own brand in a weird way, where I think if they really thought about who this character was, the same way Marvel does, and the same way DC at their best do, but don't always, you'd have this more like, what is this weird soldier who's now this Frankenstein project gone wrong really think and feel and act? And I said to my roommates when we were watching it that, you know, the other guys in this program kind of got the short end of the stick. Vin Diesel can heal from anything, and this guy gets like Predator vision whenever he looks around. Like, lean into that a little bit. Like, these characters should be a little jealous. Like, the woman can breathe when the guy allows her to, but Vin Diesel's a walking god. Like, this is an imbalance of powers.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's kind of like why I'm not the biggest fan of Sony making these superhero properties, and I understand that they had a very, very, very successful Spider-Man trilogy. I totally get that, and I completely yes, but I think a lot of that was Sam Raimi and the passion behind the people that were making those movies. And you look at Spider-Man 3, the studio said Venom, Venom, Venom. He said he didn't want to do it, and look how that turned out. Then you get into Amazing Spider-Man and all that stuff, and we all know the history of everything. So it's like I agree. I think just like with Marvel Studios, and again, I think this is the thing that people have been saying forever and ever and ever, and this goes back to even the Robert Downey Jr. comment, is when you have people behind a project who are very, very passionate about that thing, like Robert Downey Jr., you know, when they recast Iron Man, it will never feel like Robert Downey Jr. because Robert Downey Jr. was Iron Man. He was Tony Stark on camera, off camera. No matter what interview you watch with him, you feel like you're just watching Tony Stark doing an interview.
Yes.
Like, that's the magic of that casting. And will that ever be captured again? It's possible to say. You know, it's kind of like Christopher Reeve with Superman, Hugh Jackman with Wolverine. These are these actors who are so passionate about the characters that they play that you kind of just look at them as the character. So when you look at Vin Diesel and you look at Bloodshot, you think of, you know, Fast and the Furious. You think of the other things that he's done. He's not really an actor that you can that you will ever really associate to anything other than, you know, Dominic Toretto probably. You know, a lot of people even forget that he was the voice of the Iron Giant. So I think like that's also kind of what Bloodshot needed. It needed an actor or someone that when people look at him, they can just associate him as, oh, that's Valiant's Bloodshot. And I know for actors that's tough because that leads to typecasting and everything. But I think we just live in a different world. We just live in a different world where people are so aware to what everybody's doing. I mean, I think even if Sony's marketing would have embraced new platforms, and I'm going to sound like a 10-year-old, but if you embrace new platforms like TikTok or Instagram or all these things, like, you can have smart marketing pushes to get more people's eyes on it. But when you're a traditional studio like Sony, like you were saying, a lot of those people there are not paying attention to that kind of stuff. They have young people working underneath them probably who do, but
they don't listen to them.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, Sony, because whenever they make something really innovative like Spider-Verse, and I don't know that they necessarily always should, but whenever they get these sparks of innovation and I feel like they should double down and really go for it, they don't, which is like smart. Keep that animation and that style special and unique, so when it comes back, we're excited. But at the same time, like, let those people take those risks, because they have a Ruben Fleischer, am I saying that right, who directed Venom?
Venom 1, yeah.
I can't differentiate his DNA with this director's DNA at all when I see these two movies.
Yeah.
You could have told me that it was the same. And part of that is because the Bloodshot director, this is his first feature film. His only other directing credit is a Love, War, and Robots on Netflix credit. So I think that's also why you see a little bit, we were kind of joking around that some shots look very The Matrix or David Fincher. And when I looked that up, I was like, oh, well, because
he doesn't have a style.
Fincher's show, and Fincher's a big Sony guy, and I'm sure that's how this collaboration came to be over time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting when you kind of see that influence, where I think even when you watch, you know, Marvel has a formula, right? But I love their formula. But even within that, Iron Man feels very different from Black Panther, feels very different from Winter Soldier, and they follow the same beats and patterns, but the director's DNA is still in there. The actor's DNA is still in there. The choices people are making kind of breathe a little bit more than they do here. This felt very, I don't know, I think, you know, the early aughts action films where it was all dark and dreary and sad.
At the core, while we still all enjoyed aspects of it, it feels like a conveyor belt Sony 2000 superhero film. Like
totally.
It sucks. I think Blake and I have watched many of Sony's products over the last couple of years, and unfortunately, outside of probably Bad Boys and Spider-Man recently, they've all been sort of a letdown. And I don't know what it is there. I don't know what they're doing there. I'm not sure exactly how to turn it around, but I think there are issues with the way that they choose what they choose to do next as far as properties. They seem like they go more for name brand recognition and then don't worry about the story part until they're halfway through filming.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the writing team on this movie. It's like you have Eric Heiser, who is also a comic book writer, but he wrote Arrival.
Right.
Like he wrote a hugely successful and well-received movie, and then you see his writing credit for Bloodshot. You're like, yeah, man, you know, they're like the Tim Miller story is like it's not as common as you think. You know, Tim Miller was lucky that he inherited a movie like Deadpool with already a lot of working parts. Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, Ryan Reynolds, who was hugely integral to the marketing and the making of that movie.
Right.
You know, so it's like those types of people only translate so often. Like Alex Garland is another example of that, of somebody who translated really, really well. But yeah, it's not possible for that to happen with everyone. And I think if you're gonna, you know, bet on this movie creating a some sort of cinematic universe, you know, even though he's disconnected from everything else that's going on, you have to get, I think you need to get people that are a little bit more experienced or have a very, very clear vision of what they're doing, and not just, and I don't know if this is the case, obviously, but potentially coming in and being like, oh, this is what you guys want us to make? Okay, cool, I'll make that.
Right, yeah. It's either really let them go or just somebody who, I always say, who just points and shoots when they
do a lot of gun for hire at that studio. Men in Black's probably the one that I can point to most recently that I'm like, oh, F. Gary Gray does not fit with the Men in Black. So those two don't combine, but you're like, hey, you can do this, shoot this. And that's sort of
Yeah. So then we've talked about this universe a little bit, and I kind of want to get into that now. Obviously, it's all gone to Paramount, but until then, the movies they had were this X-Men-esque Harbinger movie, an Archer and Armstrong movie with Ruben Fleischer, so he was going to get his piece. They were going to make a Shadow Man, which I quite honestly know better from the N64 video game than I do from the comics, of which Bloodshot was an unlockable character. So there's that fun piece of trivia. But that was going to be outside the universe to begin with, and then they wanted to make a Faith movie. And then Bob Layden had a huge quote about Exo Manowar that was, there's no other story that can be told better in film. It's got everything. Aliens, explosions, Greek mythology. The characters are amazing. Why are they like just sitting on this? So everyone thought that was coming, and an Eternal Warrior movie with Dave Bautista. So they were, I mean, that's more than Marvel's Phase 1, right? Like, but I think the bigger question than whether or not all of these movies will now get made at all or at Paramount is, do you want another big cinematic universe? We've now kind of tried, I would even put DC's in this, of an attempt that didn't quite coalesce. You have the Dark Universe. We never even saw this toy universe from Paramount with Mask and G.I. Joe and everybody else. Is the same way that we were talking about Valiant standing out. Is another shared universe something you guys are interested in, or would it just kind of be a, like, at this point, chasing a ghost?
That's a good question. The one thing, too, that's worth noting is when this was originally announced in 2015, it was David Leitch and Chad Stahelski who were going to direct Bloodshot. So what a different movie that would have been.
That would have been nuts.
That would have been crazy movie. In terms of a cinematic universe, I mean, look, I do think that every studio is trying a little bit too hard right now to build cinematic universes. I think kind of like the same thing with reboots and prequels. It just becomes that hot like keyword, that hot SEO keyword that people are like, oh, people are searching for these things. Let's reboot and remake everything. Let's, now the trend is going to be to make sequels of everything, set 40 years later and all that sort of stuff. But
ignore the 2 sequels before it. We're going to Terminator Dark Fate everything.
exactly. But I mean, I'm always interested in exploring big universes, and especially when they're comic book universes, because I think a lot of passion is put into a lot of different books and a lot of different characters and their respective worlds. And I think it'd be really cool to have that. And I also don't think that not every single quote unquote cinematic universe needs to try to be as big as Marvel. Like I think what Marvel did is they were ahead of the curve. They capitalized on this very early on. They knew what they were doing, and they were the first ones out of the gate to just nail it. And I think like if your objective is to just repeat that, you will never succeed, because the formula, it just had all the right components at the right time. It's the next step of like, cool, how do we take this concept and how do we make it work for us first of all in our characters, and what can we do to just be true to who those characters are. And don't expect to make $25 billion over the course of 10 years, as great as that would be. If again, it's all about having the right objective, and if your objective is just that, then I think the creativity completely gets thrown out the window.
I think you're exactly right. I always think about, I had an entertainment marketing teacher when I first moved out here named Susan Wren, who did the marketing for Titanic in the 90s and ran Paramount, and she was a great, great woman from the Bronx. But I brought up kind of a similar question once of, everyone feels that these sequels, reboots, whatever SEO thing you're chasing with dollar signs in your eyes, how do you counteract that? And she made a great point that, you're a business, so you got to chase the dollar signs a little bit. Mm-hmm. But art should always be 51% of what you're doing, and then 49% of the business. That's the balance. But the art and creativity should be the higher one, if only by a little bit. The second you're 51% business, you're just going to make cookie cutter stuff to chase everybody's tail. And then what are you going to do? That's what she also said. It was a very like Joker quote of like, you're a dog chasing your, I don't even know what I would do if I got it. Like, let's say another studio hits big and catches up to Marvel, and now they're the industry leader. What do you think the guys who didn't even have the creativity to make their own idea are going to lead the industry anywhere innovative or interesting? They're not, because they got there by ripping off everybody else.
Yeah, and at this point, I think playing the game of catching up to Marvel, it's long gone.
Yeah,
they're 10 years in.
At this point, you can't. There is no catching up to Marvel. At this point, I think a lot of people. It's weird. We talk about Blumhouse, but I think they need to take the model of like go less. Like, let's come up with a concept first, but let's not spend. We're not going to get to that point, so let's not make our bottom line where we have to make $1 billion. Let's make a $35 to $40 million movie and like keep it a lot less in house, so we only have to make $250 million. Like Bad Boys 3 is a hit because it only cost them $60 million to make. That's where they need to start shooting their stuff for. And I think universes. I think now I want them to happen more organically as opposed to the way the MCU happened. Like, it's weird, but Fast and the Furious now has become a universe because of Hobbs and Shaw and all that stuff. It did it sort of the back way. Like, it was started off as a Point Break rip off, and now it's extended onto this. It kind of just happened.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of how you have to do it. You take each film as it is, and you're like, all right, cool, we're here. Can we stretch this out? Can we make more? Can we do something else with this? I think you and I, Blake, we've watched a lot of movies, and we see all these movies that end with a button or a post credit that says, cool, we'll never see this happen again. This, whatever you've just put in as a seed, we'll never see this pay off. And we actively hate that. And I think movies should just be your film first, and then if something comes out of that, we will continue on after the fact.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that. I think that's a great time to switch over to our box office segment, which I think will be an interesting part, because we'll also talk a little bit about this new VOD landscape and the potential of theaters a little, because it's unavoidable, really. I think all of our episodes are now going to have this, like, who knows what it'll be, since we don't even know what our next episode will be, because... For all we know, A Quiet Place 2 will show up tomorrow on Netflix, and there we'll have it. But the movie, again, it opened kind of right around the same time when all of this got serious with COVID-19. If you're time stamping our episode, today is, March 29th, 2020. We are 2 weeks into social distancing and isolating and quarantining and flattening the curve, as it were. It cost between the 45 and 66 million. It made 9.1 million its opening weekend, behind Onward, beating The Hunt and Invisible Man in its second weekend, which isn't by no means bad. 9.1 sounds very small, but you have to remember that this was about 12 hours after AMC said that they were closing all their theaters, and about 2 hours after the CDC said don't gather in places of 50 or more. We were all texting each other because we were going to do this episode that weekend. And I think I literally got Adam's text as I was typing to him, where we were both saying the same thing, that we had to delay because we weren't going to go to a theater this weekend.
Yeah.
Which I think for the three of us is a crazy thing. That was always my Thursday and Friday. I've got my A-list. I walk over to the AMC Century City after work, and I have a little bit of dinner and maybe a drink, and then I pop down and watch my film.
Yeah.
It's a good time.
It's a weird, we're all avid moviegoers, but this has been a weird time. My getaway is to go to a theater, either early or late, depending on what people I want to be around. But I'll go to the theater, grab my drink, and sit down in the back row in the center of the theater and just watch whatever the hell I get to watch. And that not happening right now has been the weirdest thing of all of this.
Yeah, same here.
Go on, Adam.
Yeah, no, it's almost tradition now that every Thursday night we go out, to the 10:30 shows and we watch whatever's new, and it's become such a tradition. We're so used to it. And then even throughout the week, when I have a night where, I'm not having to be downstairs in the studio and I can get out early, I'll go and I'll watch something else that came out new. So, and I had tickets for the Saturday morning matinee, and I was all ready to go. And then I was like, probably not the best idea to go. And it's honestly like one of the very few times I've it's probably not a good idea to go to the movies, because normally the only reason I won't go is because some plan changed and I'm like, well, this plan sounds more fun, or it's hanging out with people that I normally don't get. It's never like, well, I don't feel like going.
Right.
It's a strange time.
Yeah, I actively went back to the theater after the Batman, the shooting at the theaters. People were like, you shouldn't go to the movies. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the movies. This is the one time I was like, maybe I should not go to the theater on this one.
No, yeah, I had a very Matrix Reloaded Merovingian stance for a while, where I was like, you mark my words, boy, and you mark them well. I have survived your predecessors, and I will survive you. And that's going to be by social distancing, I don't have invisible twins that can chase people down on a highway. Also, the Merovingian, I think, lost in the end. Agent Smith, it doesn't matter. As we all know, I think at this point, Sony and Blumhouse are kind of the first two to go, we'll do our VOD stuff early. We'll try to make up some lost ground. We'll release The Hunt. We'll release Bloodshot. They both had two different tactics with this. You can rent The Hunt for $20 for 48 days. You can rent The Invisible Man for 48 hours at $20. Bloodshot just pushed up its VOD release by an insurmountable amount and said $20 to own outright. Birds of Prey did the same thing. I think Onward came out also and is going to have Disney Plus soon. Rise of Skywalker had its digital release early, but is not on Disney Plus. I don't have all of them in front of me. That's all I can do off the top of my head. But I tried to find VOD sales numbers, and I did not know that these are not tracked in any cohesive way.
No.
The best I can get is as of March 25th, my birthday, on iTunes, this was coming in at number 4 on VOD hits, behind 1917, Onward, and Birds of Prey, and it was number 1 on Amazon Prime.
Wow.
So
okay.
Normally, this is where we go. Clearly, an audience was interested. Clearly, they weren't. We're going to get a sequel. We're going to not get one. This is such a different and unique situation that I almost want to ask the room, how do you guys think we read these numbers? It has, I'll also add, worldwide made $29 million, which I think, all things considered, means that if we were now in its second or third weekend, it would have fallen to Mulan, obviously, but it might have been in second. A Quiet Place 2 would have also been in there, but it maybe would have made its budget back. Do we think this means there's interest from the audience to have a sequel, or do you guys think that this is unfortunately the head's been cut off and there's not much you can do?
It's interesting that 1917, like, it's hard to read those numbers because 1917 is a Oscar-esque, like Oscar-nominated film, so that number is automatically going to be one. So we're in this weird time where we're getting VOD new releases versus stuff that people weren't able to see in the theater in the first place. So now they're like, that's why that number is so high. I don't know if I can really count on these numbers though, because I feel like a lot of people are just watching everything right now. And it's this weird thing where they are now sitting at their home bored because they're locked away. I think if this was in a normal situation where this got released to VOD, I don't think these numbers would be that high. I think people are like, I've already watched this and I've watched this. I've seen The Tiger King. I've watched Ozark. Oh, cool. Bloodshot. I like Vin Diesel. Let me pop this on and consume it. And I don't know if in a normal situation that would happen.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I think it's really tough to say because, I mean, you look at some of the movies that have been trending in the last 10 to 14 days, like Contagion, Soderbergh's movie.
Yeah.
It was like at the top of everyone's list of like most watched movie, and you're like, well, okay, if that's the case, then like everything that's happened has really skewed and shifted numbers for everything. So yeah, it's tough. But I mean, I would say that just kind of based on what I saw on social media, particularly Twitter, it seems like the most of the enthusiasm was towards Birds of Prey and Bloodshot, and then I would say somewhere in the middle maybe was The Invisible Man, which I thought was also a great movie.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's like it is really tough to gauge and understand how they're going to calculate all that. Like, yeah, is it just going to be straight up by like how many people bought it? Is it going to incorporate ticket sale? I'm sure someone somewhere has a number and they're probably looking at it, doing the math and thinking like, oh, surprisingly, this movie actually made some money back. But then, then it's trying to figure out what demographics did it really hit with? Is it more adult? Is it kind of everybody? Is it, younger? Like, I'm sure they take all of those things into consideration when they decide like, is this even worth doing this movie again? And when we talked to the producer, I asked the question. I kind of knew the answer to it already, but it was kind of nice to hear it from somebody like that. Was, are you going to bother or try to do any sort of theatrical re-release once all of this is over to maybe help try to like boost those numbers or try to entice people to come back? And they said, because of everything that's happened and because of just where we happen to land, it wouldn't be worth it for us. The movie's out. Let the movie be out.
Right.
People can buy it to own it, and it just wouldn't really make any sense to change that.
Yeah, it's weird because that chart doesn't. Invisible Man's not going to be high on there because a great deal of that money, they made their money in theaters. Like they had 2 weeks in theaters, and people who wanted to see that movie saw it. I mean, it's already at 124 million under the gate before all hell broke loose. So it's weird to track them versus the rest. Like it's just everything happened and people are releasing things in different windows and different ways. It's just a weird time to kind of track that. But I do think, though, that what could come of this is there may now have to be a standardized way of tracking VOD numbers because the way that this is going on, there needs to be like, oh, shit, we now have to watch all of this.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a hard to track. You're right. Because even like... And Adam, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I'd love to get your opinion on kind of this new world that we're living in. If you're a fan of it or not, we're seeing like some people are doing rentals and some people are doing you have to buy it. And I was just talking to my dad and very much was like, Dad, you should watch Bloodshot. You would love it. And he said, I don't want to buy it for $20. I don't want to buy a digital copy. If I'm going to buy something, I want it to be physical because I don't know if Vudu or Comcast. These same narratives of like, did I really buy my Nintendo Switch game or am I leasing it from Nintendo until the next one comes out? Did I really buy these wonderful 3-pack of comedies on Vudu or am I leasing it from Walmart until they don't need that service anymore? Like, what am I really doing? And some people are going straight to streaming. I know that was a big Rise of Skywalker point of contention was I give you $7 a month, give me my movie, whatever it is. How do you feel about it? And
I
even some
mean,
are tiered, right? Like Downhill came out for $10 and Black Widow might be 30. Sorry, go on.
no, I mean, yeah, and it is a tricky landscape. Like I'm one of those people that, to me, physical media will always sort of be like my number one resource when it comes to consuming media at home. Um, we've seen, YouTube and Netflix and all these digital streaming services have lowered their quality. And we were just trying to watch Ex Machina the other night on Netflix, and the streaming quality was, I don't want to say it was terrible because it wasn't terrible, but when you're so used to seeing Netflix's normal quality being so high, putting on a movie, you're like, man, this is really disappointing. I went straight for my Blu-ray and I put in the Blu-ray, so that will always kind of be my number one. I don't dislike streaming service, those types of streaming services like Vudu and stuff. I know they have a huge audience, and I understand that people don't, they want to declutter nowadays. They don't want to hold on to stuff like that. Um, so I don't know what the future could look like. I mean, I think it would be kind of insane if studios started making movies that were just straight to a buy it now type of offer, like what we saw with some of the movies that came out recently. And yeah, I think it is kind of frustrating that a movie like The Rise of Skywalker, it comes out on digital. It's going to be out on Blu-ray, I think this Tuesday, and the fact that it's still not on Disney Plus, I'm like, yeah, why are you paying $5 a month for this if you're not getting it? I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Onward. You could rent it or buy it for $20, but it's going to be on Disney Plus, I think, next Friday. So
April,
like,
yeah, it's Friday, yeah.
yeah, so like, why the hell am I going to spend $20 if I can just wait,
So
the extra 2 weeks?
that is exactly what I did. Is, oh, I like to watch Onward, and I saw those numbers. And it's like, well, I have Disney Plus. I'll just wait till April 3rd. Like,
Yeah.
why would I do anything else?
Yeah, I liked the movie, but I didn't like it so desperately that much that I need to have it now,
Right.
Right. I think then the other question, and I was saying this with a coworker, is kind of what will it look like when things are normal again? Are we going to see really, really crowded Fridays with, and I'm making this up, Wonder Woman and Black Widow coming out on the same day, or A Quiet Place 2 and two other horror movies? Are we going to see, this is kind of a weird example, but I'm going to use how video game releases used to be, where they were all fall heavy. It was all fall and Christmas and now what's going to come. And then we started seeing these giant releases in spring and summer and winter, and the sales were the same and people would buy and move things around and it didn't really matter. Like right now, Friday is kind of like the movie day, but is it possible that we'll see, to avoid kind of stepping on everyone's toes, a giant tentpole release on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, like to get out of the way of somebody else?
Yeah, I don't think that's outside of the realm of possibility, but I do think that if you start, like, let's say you put out Wonder Woman on a Wednesday and then you put out Black Widow on a Friday, like, I just don't think there's a big enough gap between those days. And I think those movies will inevitably trample over each other at the box office, and I think it's gonna be like the 5 freeway at noon in the middle of Hollywood. Like, it's just gonna be overcrowded.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be really tough. I think what I was saying, when we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and look, like, this may not happen, but I thought that, like, at the very least it could be super possible that a lot of these big movies that are on track to release in the fall, they could very honestly shift to next year. And I think we might see a cascading effect where all of these big tentpole releases from 2020 are going to move to 2021, and then those 2021 movies will move to 2022. And I think it's possible that it could have that sort of a big ripple effect. But I know that there's a lot of money involved in all that. One thing though is, like, if you're a movie that hasn't started advertising yet, maybe it's not the worst possible scenario. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of how that would work, but I wouldn't be surprised, because I mean, look, if 007 was able to lock in this November day, and we're kind of, and Black Widow and Mulan and Wonder Woman, well, I guess not Wonder Woman because they announced a new day, but if these movies that are supposed to be coming out in the next few weeks to month, if they're not locking in new days and they're just kind of like waiting and waiting and waiting, I mean, they're going to be waiting to the point where they're going to run out of dates to choose from.
he landed on what I was going to say, because I think it was smart that before all of this really started happening, MGM was just like, yo, we're going to move Bond over here and pick a date. We're going to put our flag in the sand and do it. And Wonder Woman has subsequently done it too. There's a lot of places, mainly Disney, is just kind of just floating around. And granted, they do have two titles. They have Mulan and Black Widow that if they play something somewhere, people typically are just going to get the hell out the way.
Yeah.
But still, they're going to get to a point where they don't have space anymore. So they do need to choose something. I think I don't know if they'll shift everything, because studios typically budget their stuff in calendar years. And they're already taking a loss this year. So they I think Warner Brothers and Disney are sitting with kind of bullets in the chamber. They're like, all right, when this does open up, we need to have something that at least makes us some type of revenue this year. Sony does a little bit too if Ghostbusters ever gets pushed, but that date could move around now too.
Yeah, it's also interesting when you look at kind of probably more Disney/Fox now than anybody else has these untitled Marvel project, an untitled Star Wars project, and they could now just go, well, that untitled Marvel project is now Doctor Strange 2. We already had that date in, and we're just gonna, because it's Occam's razor, is exactly what Adam said, is we'll just cascade everything a year, take the L and walk away.
Yeah.
You know, it's you've already spent the money on the production budget, and the advertising budget will change a little bit, but the overhead of a theater cost, I have to assume, is subsequently lower when there are no theaters open. So the biggest losses are probably the ones that came out that weekend or the weekend after. Like Mulan and Black Widow probably got out quick enough where they can do it, and Wonder Woman and everything else. I think the bigger question is how long, but it's going to be a really interesting, crowded market.
Where Adam has a good point, though, that some of this stuff could push for this very reason. The movies that the studios have coming out next year are no longer filming. So their dates are going to have to get pushed anyway. So they may have to shove some of this stuff back to fill in the holes of the films that aren't actively shooting.
Well, and we've already seen some change, right? Like you brought up Bad Boys for Life earlier, Terrence, and that came out in January, which is usually a dumping ground. And not only was that movie amazing, it made so much money. So, you might even see those weird things of where they traditionally wouldn't put Black Widow in January, February, March. They will. And these kind of, we on our podcast, we kind of look ahead at least 6 months of what our schedule is, because as rare as it is, sometimes there are original movies that come out on opening weekends. So we try to have something in those slots. And those slots may now just get filled. Like the scary dumping ground dates might not exist anymore and just be, the summer started early in January. Come see Eternals, or however they'll do it.
Well, and I think we're kind of like that whole thought process of like, oh, summer blockbuster. It's a very fun like 90s nostalgia thing. We just produce way too many movies every year that are big budget movies. I mean, the slate for all these big budget movies has, for the last like 15 years, slowly been shifting. It was like mostly May and June, July. Then it was May, June, July, August, and now we're all the way up into like March and February with movies like Deadpool. If Marvel were to put out Black Widow the first weekend of January, that movie's gonna make money.
Oh yeah.
Right. There's some things. There's strategic marketing and strategic positioning, and then there's we've made the next Marvel movie, and people will miss it. I was theorizing with my roommate and friend of the show who's been on the show, Zane, if he thinks that when this is all over, if we'll have more people showing up to theaters than before. And I don't mean like before now, I mean like 90s numbers, 80s numbers. Like, will ticket sales go up as opposed to the box office? Will we see kind of a surge of people missing going out, and suddenly the going out activity will be the movies? And will we see a big influx, or will people's consuming behaviors stay the same? It's going to be a very cool thing to watch, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just going stir crazy being at home, And I think any opportunity they have to get out of the house, whether it's to go to a park or, I mean, that's why we've had beaches and parks and things closed, because people need to get out of the house. They want to get out. I think it would be amazing if the movie theaters were flooded again with people once all of this goes away and everything gets better. But I do also think it's going to take some time before people are comfortable going back to a hugely filled public place like a movie theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a trust. Is there anything else you guys want to add, or I'll wrap us out?
No.
Well, that is our show, guys. Thank you so much. Did the internet go when somebody was trying to say something?
No, you're good.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. That was our Bloodshot episode of Hollywood Already Did It. You can leave us a nice review on iTunes or any other podcast service you have. I know Podchaser is getting more and more popular. They're a fun little place. You can follow
Uh-oh. Did he break out? Yeah.
I'm at as always, Blake, and where can the good people find you, and what shows are you guys putting out right now?
Like, you broke up a little bit at the back end there.
Adam, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Would you like to plug yourself and your shows and let the people know where to find you?
Sure. So thankfully, because we are on house arrest, we're in Operation Stay at Home. We are still live streaming. So I live where I work with two of my roommates, and we're running every single day. We're doing stuff starting at 11 a.m. We're streaming all the way until 11 p.m. We're doing board gaming. We're doing watch-alongs. We've been doing some great stuff like watching Cowboy Bebop with our audience. We're going to be doing some fun movies this week, including TMNT, Tremors, Inception. So we're doing a lot of really, really, really fun stuff. We're starting off the big chunk of our day with our daily podcast, where we're just kind of catching people up on what's happening. That's live starting at 11 a.m. 11 a.m. Pacific time, not Eastern time. I live in Los Angeles. Hello, I'm awake, and we're doing that every single day. And thank you guys so much for having me. It was really fun to come back and chat with you guys about this interesting movie, but also this very interesting situation that we're in.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next week.